All right, I know attention spans are getting short. It's close to lunchtime, but hold your horses. We have two more talks that are going to be really interesting. Up next, we have Gaurav Mehta. Gaurav is the co-founder and chief innovation officer of Concur, and he's focused on solving the complex governance challenges of the DPDPA with a decentralized consent management solution. He's at the forefront of the industry in blockchain auditing, taxation, and compliance. Gaurav's deep technological roots are evident from his roles as CTO for multiple pioneering ventures, including the creation of NDAX, India's first real-time multi-asset digital exchange, and Blockright, one of the world's first NFT platforms. His expertise also extends to working with government and law enforcement agencies as a forensic auditor in the crypto economy. Please welcome to the stage, Gaurav Mehta.
While it is being set up, we all are concerned about privacy, right? I'm sure everyone has received a spam call. In fact, there's a rumor that the DPDPA is because Bajaj Finance calls Minister and try to sell the loan. I mean, that's what the rumor is going out in the market. But it would be interesting to understand what has been happening and what can we predict as we move forward with the implementation. So my question to you today is right now, on 15th of October, where are we? Anyone? Where are we? Yes, perfect. That's the state of awareness. So anyway, I was talking in the context of DPDPA. In 2023, the government released the enacted the bill. Just a quick recap. On January 2025, 1.5 years, they took a time to specify the specifics how the rule will be deployed on the ground, because this is the techno-legal rule. It's all defined for a high velocity technology ecosystem where the data is moving at a speed of light. So the government needs to have that rule in principle so that is able to not only accommodate the need of today but also tomorrow. So it's a lot of work. They released the draft in January, and up till May, June, they almost collected 7,000 comments from the industry. So it took a time for them to absorb, because they also need to validate whether it would stand the test of the people comment or not. At the same time, this was the legal validation internally happening based on the crowdsourcing of the information or the comments or the rejections, whatever is it. With that, they are now looking at the technical part of it, where they opened up code for consent competition, where they envision that if India has to actually do the compliance, we have to help people do it in the as simple as possible way. It's going to be a cost center. We do not pay for 10,000 software for GST. Why would people pay for the privacy? So that's ultimately a larger concern for the industry, and the government understanding this or having a socialist point of view, they thought that we would be deploying some larger solutions or digital public good and gradually move forward to the DPI. So that is ongoing. So what is expected from the communication in the market is that by October, November, the rules would be notified. And during this phase, 6 of the entities has been selected. I represent Concur Consent Manager, which is one of the 6 entities that has been selected to operationalize the DPDPA. Now, we have been active into the ecosystem for almost 3 years. We did solve a lot of problem for us, and we outgrown ourselves. So we said that why don't we innovate for the good? I mean, we could see 1, 2, 5, 3, 10 years. We don't know whether that is a delusional thinking or that is something down the fact. But what we foresaw is that the state of privacy is something that is inspired from the GDPR. Of course, privacy has been there for almost like 2 decades, but operationalizing privacy or realizing it to the speed of or the development that is happening is quite a nightmare. Everyone is aware about the nightmare of the AI. It caught us off guard in just last 2 years. So what we think is that right now the policies of the government, what they're looking at is a control of the data, wherein we have looked at, okay, the stage 1 was ignorance, almost like 2000, and in 2015 with the GDPR coming in, it started becoming more engaging for the whole world. Right to privacy was talked about, GDPR rolled out, then we saw the emergence of the cybercrime, AI came, DPDPA came. So here the core thesis for next 4-5 years we believe is about the control of the data. How we can ensure the balance from the industry is toppled or bought back from the technology to the government with the lever of the compliance. But what we need to look forward is also the ownership. We have a sovereign identity in making, lot of customer side or the data principal side data acquisition happening. So somewhere we think in the future, you will actually be the owner of data, or maybe the data won't even be shared because processing might be happening on the edge. Just saying, just speculating. So India is a pioneer of a digital public infrastructure. We have seen a lot of success story. One of the success story or the component that is relevant is the consent artifact that was released by the MIT as well as the account aggregator framework that was envisioned. So accounts, just a quick recap, accounts aggregator framework is regulated framework under the RBI, more like SRO, wherein the banks provide the data to the financial institution or any other institution or the parties that are interested in getting the information out of it. In order to facilitate data, there needs to be a action of a consent manager. So account aggregator, the goal is to transfer the data in the secure way with the modus of the consent, part one. But when we look at the DPDPA, the consent itself is a goal. So we see a lot of developments happening in the DPI, different infrastructure. There is some backend protocol coming in the ONDC. There's an extract protocol for information validation and all those things. Now, quick recap, what is the DPDPA? It asks us a lot of things. You do the DPIA, you do consent management, machine readability, interoperability, transparency. It is all bounded with each other. So just to simplify, you as a data principal, right now what you do is you go to any of the data fiduciary, Flipkart, Myntra, any of the website that is asking you collect the personal data. Beauty of our law, it is not telling this is personal data, this is not, because in the age of tech, even your device, browser size, fingerprint could be the identifier based on who or what the entity has the capabilities. So the government is very smart. They haven't defined like a GDPR, what is PII, what is PIA. That is just very contextual and we'll figure out as you move forward. So when you give the data to any organization, you do the data transaction. Now this is a mindless zombie transaction that we all have been doing. Just give the data, move forward, give the data, move forward. So what the law will envision, or the law is envisioning, is at this point of time, the consent management system or the consent manager will come and it will make you pause and show you the notice in a certain and very specific way what the government has said. We'll take a look at the notice, and post this, they are collecting the data and utilizing for their own purposes. There are a lot of checks and balances that are expected from the data fiduciary during their processing stage as well. We'll go into that. Post that, they might have n number of data processor, internal, external, or international, cross-border. So there are some expectations from them as well. So during this all, from data collection to processing to 3, 4, 5 years, what are the activities that would be happening? You might update the consent, you might revoke the consent, how and what's going to happen, we'll see. You might delete the consent, and there is all associated downstream actions that would be happening, because you go to Flipkart, let's say, and you update your, I don't want any of the Diwali emails. You are bored with it, I don't want any birthday emails, I hate it. So for that, they need to communicate with their 5 other systems, whatever. So that downstream is not going to happen on the individual level. It's going to happen on automated level. That is what is the expectation of the DPDPA, because anyway, this is a whole automate. So machine readable is one of the ask of the DPDPA consent management criteria. Now, simple journey, you go to any of the services, you take a certain action. Whenever you give the data, your notice is spin. You take a pause, you read a notice, you give yes or no, and you take it forward. It sounds very bulky, right, at this point of time. But as soon as you give the notice, you are given 1 or 2 seconds so that you can go to what we call user portal as well. Trust.flipkart.com, you would be able to see what data has been given, what are the processing is happening, because the law mandates it needs to be as easy to give the consent and it needs to be as easy to revoke the consent or review the consent. These are the 2 lines. So that can only be realized when you are also educating and also giving them the tools and tech. With that, you will have your own dashboard, grievance center, where you can raise the request, or if you have got some unsolicited call, if they want to understand if their processor is also abusing the ecosystem. So it's a very planned out activity wherein everyone is giving some nuggets of the intelligence that would be helpful for them to execute the law. Now, this is all like back end, what goes within the organization, what they have to do. They identify data element, collect the purpose, they define the purpose translation, because it needs to be 22 language, schedule 8, 22 language. Then you spin up the consent notice. Consent notice is a nightmare. It sounds very simple, but someone wants more data, more purpose, less data, some data here, some data there, some data while you are delivering, some data while you are doing credit card. So it's there are different kind of notices. There's a what we call static notice, dynamic notice, just-in-time notice, progressive notice. This is all different compliance world. So at all the touch point, from your audio, offline, sales of point, connected TV, mobile app. So you collect the consent, you give the consent, there is a certain flow that goes within the organization. So just a brief recap, of course I can dive deeper into it, but we want to understand what the DPDP opportunities here. So now when we go deeper into it, every organization would have their own consent repository, maybe with them or maybe with their consent manager. Whenever the consents are being updated, they're going to be what we call CDC or consent, whenever the consents are updated, the organization will want to capture this data changes. So this data changes are relevant because a lot of their processing activity or their process are dependent on it. If the execution is not happening, then the organization becomes non-compliant. To give you example, right now I say, hey, my consent is no. And tomorrow, if the organization is not able to pass that information to their data processor and they take action, then I can raise a grievance that, hey, I said no to you. Why did you do a certain action tomorrow? There's a lot of practically aspect as well. So ideally, this needs to be a near real time. So there would be actions. When we categorize the action, there would be in two categories. One is what we call consent action, update, delete, revoke, expire, renewal. And there is also data actions. So data right has been given to you in section 11, 12, 13, I think 14 as well, where you can ask for a copy of the data, deletion of the data. And this data itself is another nightmare because organization has a lot of data sprawl. They have a data sharing with other parties as well. So some brief idea about what goes on to the back end of the organization during deployments. So now this is the DPDPA, which is a mature version of the international law, because when we look at the international law, the mother of all law or the principle, GDPR, it came out 2016. Up till 2025, the state of implementation was abysmal. We are talking about Europe, one of the richest country or the richest continent, not continent, continent, I don't know. So the state of affairs is almost like, sorry? A member states, okay. It seems like more like a Maharashtra collectively. So it's almost like 50% of the organizations are still on the implementation phases. There are almost like 27% organizations that are confident that we can pass through the test of ICOs if they come and audit us and all those things. Now we started thinking, I'm talking about we were engaged into this. If that is the state of Europe, what will India do? 2023 it will come, and for next 5-10 years, by 2030 the world has already, India is still implementing. So that was our concern. So we started thinking what could be done. So we realized we can rely on 3 A's to actually catalyze or bootstrap the DPDP in India. One is create as much awareness as possible because it's reinforcing. If you are not asking the organizations, then they are not going to comply. Of course, the government is trying to penalize them with the 250 crores, but ultimately the power is upon us. Access by that we mean tools and technologies. It sounds easy, but the organization needs not only the consent management system, their data deletion, data practices, data provenance, a lot of things are there. As well as the amount is the biggest concern that we feel is going to be a killer for the DPDPA, because nobody wants to pay in India, let alone for the compliance until unless the government comes in. And we are glad that the government was also thinking on the same line, because that's why they had a code for consent. So what could be done to the accelerate DPDP implementation? We said provide implementation standards. Like there are a lot of gaps. There are at least 9-10 consent managers in India that are all working on their own approach. Everyone has their own record keeping or the consent artifact standard. Of course, this industry has looked at the MIT's 2017 framework, but it is not sufficient. Why do I say it is? Because RABIT or account segregator also had to improve upon that. So definitely this is a 2017 artifact standard is a good starting point. By artifact standard, I mean how do you record a consent on the machine level so that it could be utilized for the functions that it is being, for the functions it is expected. Then of course, open source tools and technology is always expected. We have seen the success of this ecosystem. Making market more competitive. If we look at international solution provider, like there are some giants, so their solution is very, very, very costly and it is not going to work in India. When we look at the Indian commercial service provider, also their solution is high. Of course, it is 1/4 of what is the international solution, but still we believe that is too high. So competition needs to be there from the day one in order for consent or the system to be affordable. Otherwise, the organization might resist the adoption. And there needs to be a collective innovation, because this is a building block. The consent is a building block. You can imagine many of the services or future infrastructure or anything. It's up to imagination. So we got excited. Yay, DPDPI. Maybe yes, maybe no. So we contemplated what could be done. So DPI, in our understanding, is more like whenever there is something larger public good possible, whenever there is our national objectives, whenever there is a multi-party coordination required, some aware, some not aware, some ready with their problem statement, some not ready with the problem statement. For example, Data Protection Board of India problem statement, they know their responsibility, but they don't know how the governance office is going to work. They only have 5 crore budget. They are striving for the digital office, but there are a lot of information that they need to collect from this ecosystem in order to deliver that. So data fiduciaries were aware about what they are getting into, but the data protection mode is still like discovering phase. And if they are not ready, then law itself is not ready. So we started looking what are the different stakeholders into that and what are the incremental developments also. So DPI, when we look at it, infrastructure, it's of course for the public, but underneath that we see a opportunity to build a certain framework. And we were happy when we looked at the Center for Digital Public Infrastructure documentation, thesis and detail that when we are looking at a DPI, it needs to be interoperable, it needs to have a minimalistic, reusable blocks, diverse, inclusive, federated design. There are a lot of approaches to it. So we were happy that yes, something might seem interesting here. So why DPDPA for it? Why DPDP? Why should we striving or we should be looking at a DPI for DPDPA? One thing is obviously open source because it democratizes technology. What are the open source things required during the implementation? We are going to see the modules of that. So it requires democratization of technology, access, and helps accelerate efforts for the quicker penetration, compliance, and achieve goals. So open source is like jaldi mil jata hai to jaldi kar lenge. Simple. Stakeholder, we only know like data collector or the data fiduciary, but there are more stakeholders that are emerging. Data fiduciary one, data processors, national, international. International is a nightmare. Will Google succumb to the mandates of India? Will they ensure that the consent collection is happening in the proper way? Will they validate the consent artifact? We don't know. We are yet to see that. Data principle, because you want to be data swamitva or ownership is the core part of this law. So you will be actively engaging through the consent manager in order to reinforce the law whenever it is a deviance by the data fiduciaries that they are processing or not. Auditor is someone who will come to ensure that large organizations are actually having the continuous state of compliance or not. Regulators want to know the state of affairs actually happening on the ground. Policy makers would want to have empirical data in order to understand where the policy nudges need to be made, what is right, what is happening, what is working, not working. Academics want to contemplate upon what are the future possibilities, what are the things that are coming in that can be integrated. So there are a lot of stakeholders which, if provided with the right data point, we believe the acceleration of not actually DPDP implementation, but the adoption of all the other components that are being done could be integrated with the code part. For example, everyone is talking about secure multi-party computation or trusted execution environment. So can we envision building a certain enclaves or let's say some systems that is providing banks a capability to share the data and processors to achieve that objective without actually giving the data in hand? Why this is important is because I wouldn't want to sign then data sharing agreement with you, processing agreement with you, the rest of the compliance goals does not apply. So it's a very bright, very exciting imagination of the future, and I see the convergence of the technology is happening, but that guardrails or that direction is something still not being talked about because we are still thinking in the silos. And like I said, DPDPA is like baptism. Purane jitne paap kiye wo sab theek hai, we are going to start with a new world. So when we are looking at a new world, also like extrapolate the thinking. Fragmented data processor. We all think, yeah, abuser is data principal, but the actual abusers are the data processors. That's where the data get leaked. These are the actual participants where the enforcement is most required, because my Aadhaar card leaked by one of the data processor, I cannot change my Aadhaar card. So one leak is equal to 1000 leak. So these small data processors which are not under the radar or not even under the law are actually a threat actors, are actually something that is going to be having most impact. Okay? And the law mandates that they are not recognizing data processors, they are saying you are data fiduciary, whosoever you engage with, that is your responsibility. So the fiduciaries will also need to rely on the technologies, they would also need to rely on the lot of other things in order to achieve the objective, right? Right now, I mean, the state of affairs is very abysmal. They are sharing email, document email for processing via email and waiting for next month to tell them I have deleted. I mean, it's amazing as you go into the organization. So we started doing things for our own, then we started moving towards the ecosystem development. So what we have done, this is all what we have done, is first thing is we build the DPI ledger, the core metadata ledger. We have something called consent directory, we have consent artifact, we have Vishwasya based blockchain engine that is obviously right now on the ERC. We are looking to move it towards a Vishwasya, which is more like a hyperledger based with the blessing of the mighty and coordination. There's an open source notice. So just taking you a little more granular, understand how the law, how beautiful the law is, but how it is easy to compromise on the ground level. First thing is consent notice. consent notice, then there is a consent directory and artifact. Now, when we look at the consent notice, it is expected to have a different data elements. I mean, different organization is approaching it a different way. So this is what our way is. You have a title, data protection title, just a basic line. You don't want to burden the individual with lot of unnecessary or boilerplate content. You have your consents, which could be like, we have 8 different type of notices. This is one of the notice where they are collecting only 2 data elements and maybe with them 3355 purposes and some educative part about what are their rights and how they can execute it. Now, in industry, the actually need is totally different. Sometimes for the banks, the consent purpose is 1 or 2 or their data element collection is more. So there are different kind of notices as you go deeper into the data implementation. My concern is not this, how many notices. My concern is that because these notices are going to be shown billions of time in next 5 or 10 years, can we look at creating more gravity or the standardize of this notice? Because if we are able to create a habit, or the purpose of this notice is to make you pause, think and give. So we just started thinking, what if the government approves the emblem? It gets more gravity. Right now, we are not going to sign any of the document that has stamp paper. I'm sure nobody would without the consultation with the legal. So the thought process is, can we standardize the notice so that it is easy for everyone to use and also has become a standard psychological communication that is known to everyone. That, hey, I see a notice, let me pause. Otherwise, some company will have blue notice, someone will have pink notice, someone will have purple notice, someone will have big brand name, someone will have small brand name. So that was the thinking, and we created 8 different type of notices and submitted with the MIT for their approval. So it has a and there's also WCAG compliance. We need to look at audio support, we need to look at the video support, we need to look at a multilingual support. So those are a part of a notices. Now, when we solve this, we understood there is another gap to it. The law mandates that the purpose needs to be straightforward, simple, granular. And still the company is writing, we collect your data for product services. It's so vague statement. Tomorrow when the auditor comes, they can put anything under that statement, which is not right. Now, I as a consent manager, I could see these are the statement of the purposes that are being, but those statement of purposes could not be seen by the government until unless there's a proper channel or there's a proper information available to them. So here the compliance gap are missed, that we are expecting maybe they would be flagged by auditor down the 2 years line, 5 years line, and again we have lost the story. So we thought that notice is as good as your consent purpose. It needs to be, it need not be vague, it need not be misdirecting, it need not be non-compliant. It needs to also have a multilingual support. So tomorrow if an organization is adding some consent purpose, they would be only adding in Hindi or English or Tamil or Telugu. What about other languages? So there's a lot of work to be done by them. And these statements are also of interest to academia later on, because we have seen the SMS DLT infrastructure of India. So right now, whenever SMS, whatever SMS that you are receiving, it goes through a certain process of vetting, and that statements are also being analyzed to understand whether some fraudulent activity is happening or not. You are doing a good thing. Are you doing some communication that you should not be doing? For example, you are not allowed to use someone brands in the name and all those things. We thought that, okay, if there is a repository, it could also be, if there is a consent directory repository, it would be useful for the organization, and also it would standardize the statements, the purposes or anything else for your further work. That does not mean we are mandating you only use this purpose. So if any organization is coming with the new purposes, they could add it to this directory, and this is available for the further work. Not to mention, this is also translated into 22 languages by Bhashin India program, so that it's easy for anyone to integrate into their system. So we have so far corrected almost like 80,000 consent purposes, among which 20,000 are most prevalent. Other are something, I would say, more niche. There are almost 200 data elements that are identified, and these are all supposed to be released under Data Veda. So that is part one. Where is it all available? It is available on actually, right now it is available as a repository, but as we move forward to Vishwasya blockchain, it would be available on chain itself, so that the utilization is visible to anybody interested. All anonymous data, there is nothing like personal data. So then we looked at the other problem statements of the industry, like process validation of the consent artifact. Then there is a validation of your compliance status and all those things. So we thought, okay, and good thing is, Mighty already had a vision. When they deployed the national blockchain infrastructure, they had a consent management framework as one of their theses that could be done on this use case. So we actually, in a way, realized their activities on the ground. So our current framework is not there on the Vishwasia blockchain, but it is based on ERC20 quorum. So all those like L2, LVM chain, whatever. So it looks something like basic, all anonymous data, DF Flipkart, block ID, from this transaction to that transaction. You would be able to see. With that we are building CDC pipeline as well. So what is relevant? I, as a Flipkart, I use any of the consent management system and they are part of this interoperable network. Now they might have 10 data processor, they might have 20 data processor. I do not have to tell each and everyone to integrate to my system to do the consent validation, which is fine. I am in a certain position, I can mandate them. But that data processor will also be working with another data fiduciary or another consent manager. So it becomes an n number of integration that they have worked to. Now this metadata ledger allows not only the interoperability, but it also allows you to go to one place and to validate the consent. And that translates into a lot of less infrastructure, a lot of optimization. And so the stakeholder that we think of this part are the data fiduciary, because if they are not directly contributing to this metadata ledger, by default their consent manager is adding it to this for the further uses. Data processor can validate any point of time through this metadata ledger whether there is a actual consent or not. That is a blind side of the DPDPA. I and you, we sign the contract. I give you the data. You cannot validate whether acquisition of that data is correct or not. You cannot validate in the real time whether the consents are true or false. What is the right now the status of the consent? So these things solve that problem. Personal data board, as it goes towards the stage of the maturity, they would be able to get the heartbeats of actual implementation on the ground in the form of how many companies have actually done the DPDPA compliance. What is the growth rate every month? Do I need to intervene and do more marketing so that 510,000 more companies would be compliant next month? How many data elements are actually collected by the industry, because there's already a directory on the metadata and they know which data points are being collected by which sector or which industry. With that, there's also correlation. Someone from healthcare is collecting the Aadhaar card, telling a customer that I want to use your Aadhaar card for giving you a birthday gift. That's clearly fooling the market, but I cannot know right now until as I know how the mapping or it is being done. And because this notices are built on this, or the consent platform or consent thing are built on this, one would be able to do it on the machine level. Data principal auditor is something, someone who would gradually start interacting with, not directly but through CMP, because the law expects CMP to be one of the place where you are able to see the data sprawl, you are able to see your current status of consent, update and delete it. So this is more like a different stakeholder, whosoever is interested. Right now, the DLT infrastructure of India is being run by 6-7 telco companies like Vodafone, Airtel, SmartPing, etc. They have access to all the information. Likewise, in the Vishwasia blockchain, one of the node could be Data Protection Board of India. What node could be IIC Bangalore, based on what are their objectives, and they would be able to process their data. So these are the different stakeholders that we are expecting. What is interesting here is that identity provenance is becoming a problem. We have a different layer. There's Aadhaar layer and there's a highly critical DSC layer if you want to do MSC compliance and other thing. But tomorrow, as we move forward, I personally think that every devices will have a certain key identifiers. You would be creating information. You would be sharing information, and that needs to be have some proof of origin or initiation. So by default, we assume that all the electronic devices, laptop and everything will have their own keys. Yeah, just last slide. So here the key infrastructure could also be part. Here the lot of thought process could also be the part of it. And tomorrow, consent manager are temporary things, we believe. So the metadata ledger allows you to have a consent collection, because this also solves the legal part. There's a lot of legal thing to it. You have to prove the consent. Tomorrow in the court of law, arbitration happens. Whether that person gave the consent or not, you need to. So a lot of things. Data downstream is being taken care. Interoperability is another thing, which is the ask of a DPDPA. So the DPI we expect is supposed to bring this following value to you. As an individual, you will be able to engage, do your own consent management through the consent manager or directly with the devices, assuming the digital signatures has all been matured. Data fiduciary will be able to do the simple, they would be able to have an interoperable system with no vendor lock-in. Sorry, I wrote login. They would have a more bargaining power that reduces the cost of compliance. Downstream consent changes would be passing on directly to the different processors if they want to consume and act upon it. Consent provenance become easy for them. For a processor, it becomes a single point of integration. Interesting for Data Protection Board of India, they're able to get the market pulses for their governance goal. They're able to understand the DF adoption. They're able to understand the consent purposes, something like SMS DLT, and enforce for the larger goals. They would be able to see the state of processing, make an empirical policy planning, more conscious policy rather than assumption. Consent validation, litigation part, because they will have to look into the cases, so they would be able to validate on their own. And their auditor and researcher. For just last one, for researchers, this is going to be interesting because this is imagination. So you would be able to research on the industrial scale, that which industry is collecting what data and what purposes are their interest. Which data is being used for which specific purposes, are there any red flag or not? And if required, why this is important is because now you know that, hey, these purposes are very commodity and I can define a policy so that it could be done in India. There's also a capture of who are the cross-border data transfer happening, and there is also activity done by the processor. And with time, we believe the additional middleware could also be implemented on this, not exactly the core part of this infra, but helping that middleware become, providing that middleware technologies a GTM through this infra. So I mean, these are our thought process. Of course, there's a lot of work to be done in this space, a lot of things. So far, what we have done is we are awaiting the DPDPA notification. The development has been done. We have tested the consent with limited party. Future is there's a incremental framework, so we need to look at what more could be done. Interesting part is there are a lot of laws that are mimicking the DPDPA. So maybe the Indian standard of the infra could also go like UPI to other places. Exciting thing, international IBF TCF framework from the Europe has been said no by regulator. That is a big blow because this framework was used by Microsoft, Google, and a lot of businesses were doing activity. So that also tells me, is there a vacuum that India could fill, or the infrastructure, new or adapted infrastructure could fill? There is also platform for testing, deployment, and all those things. So the current status, these are the upcoming CMPs of India, and with them we are together moving towards creating more like a SRO that owns the technology, releases to the public and uses and does everything with the motto that Jaan ke do, and rest of the things will fall in place. So just trying to do our part and bootstrapping or operationalizing the privacy on the ground. So yeah, thank you. Happy to take the question. I've already eaten up the time and everyone is hungry. So I'll be just roaming around. Catch me up if you wish to talk in detail. Happy to do it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. I think that was a really good breakdown of the DPDPA and its pitfalls.